Oh, well, thank you for inviting me to be part of this. It's been wonderful to hear the detail and the reality of people's experience in bringing AI into the museum environment. I wanted, as has been kindly pointed out, just to explain how the two tracks of my work fuel my question today. So I'm from a consulting background, strategy consulting, organizational branding within the museum context. And I also have this research aspect of what I do, which is philosophy of technology, which enables me to write and give talks and latterly curate on the subject. And in this era, it's very much about AI. So my question today is a question perhaps different from the other ones that have been asked over the last few days. It's a question which is more about an aerial view of the subject. So beyond the application of AI, and of course, without the application of AI, AI is nothing, but over and above the application of AI, how does AI change the idea of a museum in terms of its role and its purpose in the world? And my exploration of this question is fueled by my time curating this show, which launched at the Barbican in 2019, which you might have heard of. It was certainly a big undertaking, 150 or so artists, research projects, objects, including many of the big names within the world of AI and art practice. I'm sure you'll recognize those names. The show opened over a 3-month span in 2019, but has been touring since and has been out to China and has come back with several stops in between, and it's currently at CCCB Barcelona. So it's racked up a large number of visitors by this time, which is always the hope. I must say that curating a show about AI is not an easy subject because it's such an intangible topic. It's in such an intangible world. It's basically code and zeros and ones, and giving that form within a large exhibition space is not easy. Of course, you can't just create a journey of video screens because that would simply be too tiring for the visitor. So you need to vary the interactions and make them as so-called real as possible. It's also a technical subject, so it's hard sometimes to convey the complexity of it from a technical perspective. It's political for its associations with big tech. And it's controversial because it hits at the heart of who we are and raises a whole plethora of ethical questions. It's also a very large and wide-ranging subject because it really extends into almost every discipline, and it's rooted, I would suggest, all over the world. And I really felt strongly that we didn't just tell the UK, US story of AI, but we look more globally. And so just to give you a sense of what the big ideas were that drove the exhibition, I just wanted to go through the 4 key chapters. The first was called The Dream of AI, and people were surprised to see the story of AI begin many centuries ago. And in this first section, we really looked at the spiritual and religious underpinning of AI. So the desire within human beings to bring the inanimate to life and attribute human-like powers to objects, sometimes for protective outcomes and sometimes destructive. And what was clear through this journey of research was that the journey towards AI really begins historically across great many cultures, both in the West and the East. And we might be able to say it's inherent to our kind of inquiry as human beings. The exhibition looked particularly at Shinto, the Japanese animist belief system, which at the heart of which is the notion of kami, or living energy, which is an amongst non-living things as much as living things. And according to the Shinto belief system, the human being is one part of a bigger connected system and shows respect to all parts of that system, does not see itself as over and above the rest. And then this is a piece by the dubstep music producer Kode9, and it's a piece which studies, sound piece which studies the story of the golem. The golem being a creation, so the fiction goes, by a rabbi in Prague in the 17th century, created to protect the Jewish people from an anti-Semitic attack. And as the myth has developed, the golem becomes more intelligent and ultimately destructive towards its creator. The second section was called Mind Machines, and this was really looking at the computational foundation of AI. So the early effort to emulate the brain through logic and rules, and then from the 1940s and 1950s onwards, recreating the neuron and the self-learning principles that form neural networks today. And this section was both about exploring the journey towards AI from a technical perspective in terms of its recreation of the brain, but also the recreation of the body, because as we know, for a lot of people, AI means robots, and it is that too. And so having those two tracks of exploration throughout the exhibition was necessary. But as part of this section, it became clear, of course, that so much of the human brain is still unknown, as is AI, and those two realms are using each other to understand each other. So in this section, we were really looking at the greats of AI, so objects related to Charles Babbage and Alan Turing, which were wonderful to have, letters from Ada Lovelace. And we created a special focus on the story of AlphaGo, which was the moment when DeepMind created the artificial intelligence Go player that won the 5-game match against Lee Sedol in Korea in 2016. And AlphaGo, the AI player, won by such an extraordinary, bemusing move, now gone down in history as move 37, that everybody laughed at the time, but has since changed the path of Go forever, really. And I think says a lot about novelty and originality within AI. The third section was called Data Worlds, and this was looking at the role of AI in our lives in ways we know about, in ways we don't, in healthcare, in energy, in farming, in security, in government and city planning, and was really raising those ethical questions which are so important around privacy and bias and truth, and asking, how do we navigate all of this? How do we reconcile the good and the bad? And when are we colluding, and when are we being coerced, and where is our free will in this? And so this is a shot from the current iteration of the exhibition in Barcelona. And this section paid particular attention to the work of Joy Buolamwini, who is an amazing artist and researcher based at MIT, who I'm sure you know, who has done so much to reveal bias in data sets, racial and gender bias in data sets, and really has called some of the big corporations to account. And then the last section of the show was, I think, really, in a sense, the most futuristic. It was called Endless Evolution, and this is where we move from artificial intelligence to artificial life. So the project of emulating the brain to, in a sense, emulating and recreating the body. So studying processes of the body and studying processes of nature for research purposes, but also for great innovations, gene editing, cloning, maybe in the future, mind uploading, the far future fertility technologies. All of this world really challenges our idea of the natural and perhaps exposes our prejudice against the non-natural and questions this term, the natural. And I would suggest that it really is raising the possibility that technology is part of who we are. It's a fundamental driver in our evolution. We evolve through and with it. So this section looked at the world of synthetic organs from the Wyss Institute, the work of Daisy Ginsburg, and this is the piece which brings back to life a smell of a flower registered extinct in 1916 in Hawaii. And her work at that time was really exploring reanimation of species and asking whether we deserve that, given that we weren't looking after them well in the first place. And then finally, we were very lucky to have the robot Alta 3, the non-binary robot Alta 3 in our exhibition for a few weeks. Alta 3 is a very important research project, but was wonderful to have them in our space, really delighting our audience, delighting and beguiling our audience through movement and a kind of dance and interaction, and certainly sensing and responding the people around them. So the point of view of the show was really formed by the conversation between me and my co-curator, Maholo. Maholo Uchida is based in Tokyo, Japanese woman, very experienced and very respected as a curator in science and technology. And what we were really doing was comparing the attitudinal differences to technology in our respective parts of the world. And my essay in the catalogue is looking at the philosophical underpinnings of that. So in the Western philosophical tradition, we have an idea of the human which is top of the evolutionary tree, rational, top down, in control, rather defensive towards entities that might threaten that. And then in some of the Eastern traditions from Shinto and Buddhism and Taoism, and we can't overgeneralize here, but there is clearly a different approach, which is about thinking of the human as one part within a bigger connected system. And the human being isn't the kind of sovereign being overlooking or standing above, and is much more accepting of forces and entities and intelligences that it is immersed in and dependent on. And in the promotional film for the exhibition, Maholo at the end says, there are many things we don't control, and AI is one of them. So it's an attitudinal difference, which is revealing and interesting, and for some people suggests a possible way of understanding that sense of acceptance or ease in Japanese society, possibly wider Asia, towards technology. So it's a line of thought that I talked a lot with to Maholo about, and it's sort of ambient in our exhibition. So it's an exhibition which was experimental and perhaps unexpected, but it was about AI. It was not truly yet created with AI. But what I would say, there's one exception in the piece, which I think has principles within it that suggest where AI and museum design, exhibition design might go in the future. And that's a piece by the great artist Mario Klingemann, who's a real pioneer in art and neural networks. You might know his rather ghostly, unsettling portraits that he creates. And this was an exhibit which was really a collaboration between himself, the technology, and the audience to produce art in situ on an ongoing basis for the duration of the show. So visitors were invited to upload their own facial imagery for the purpose of the piece, and then they could vote which imagery they wanted to put forth into the model. And then through the kind of design of the exhibit emerged this ongoing sort of ghostly mural of distorted portraits that was large and had presence in our space. And his work is, I think, so interesting for presenting this very unfamiliar feedback in terms of what a human being is, and raising those questions about creativity and machines. So yes, that piece of work was really a collaboration between audience and artist and technology, and perhaps it's indicative of where exhibition design might go in the future. So as a speculation beyond that, and this is all really for exploratory purposes because there's plenty of practical considerations that I just couldn't give time to here, but as a speculation for the purpose of a thought exercise, what would it be to supercharge the whole exhibition or even the whole organization with AI? How would that change its outlook and experience? And this comes back to what AI is. And for me, most certainly, it is more than a tool. I know it's often called that, but for me, it is more than a tool, much more than a tool. And it is an intelligence that is different and important, in important ways, greater than our own. LLMs are very much indication of this, and they're a sign, it's an expanding universe, and they're a sign of much more to come and a world to come, in which we will be immersed in unimaginable amounts of knowledge which span centuries, instantly navigable and available and synthesizable. And so, the brain of an LLM is really, thousands of years old in comparison to a human brain because of its time span, in a sense, and the depth of data it's drawing on. So it's operating at more than human scale and more than human speed. And I think this raises the possibility from a kind of curatorial point of view or an organizational point of view of revealing connections much more easily across cultures, across disciplines, across histories, across time zones and time spans, across languages, and telling stories of objects in a much more multidimensional way. So not just the human use case of that object or the human story, but its climatic story, its economic story, its industrial story, its material story, its cosmological story, its geological story. So I think we're entering a world where the AI technology in its generative forms can bring a multidimensionality to knowledge like never before. And that gives us then the chance to really kind of unlock or blow open history and, as I say, move beyond the narrow lane of human experience and keep changing the lens, decenter the dominant narratives and the canon, and keep multiplying the perspectives. And I think that's very important from an audience point of view. And as that journey gathers steam, I think then there's an opportunity, of course, and this is happening today, to make much more of a network of links, of active links across institutions, communities, enterprises, public organizations, public services, schools, hospitals, old people's homes, who knows, and to tune this emerging world of knowledge much more finely to our audience habits, interests, backgrounds, and profiles. So that then brings a multidimensionality to relationships. So we're entering where we'll be, I hope, working with a much, much broader canvas of history, but able to draw it down and work with it in a really micro-precise, personalized way. And it's the feedback between those two levels and leveraging the feedback between those two levels, which I think is interesting and takes the museum even further towards becoming a sort of a more organic organism. And so just a couple of last slides in terms of the evolution of the museum in its role. I mean, we can go back centuries, of course, and this is, the obvious story, the role of the museum in ancient Greek times as the temple honoring the gods, and then we had the cabinet of curiosities, and then in the 19th century the museum was as authority or national icon inherent to national identity. And then in the 20th century we've seen museums become much more of a hub, almost a social hub, a place bringing communities together. And perhaps also we've seen the museum as a catalyst, actually instigating cultural production, a site of cultural production in its own right. And then as a suggestion in terms of conceiving the role of the museum in the future, my thought here is thinking of it as a synapse, which is a junction in the brain through which flows enormous amounts of data, and the synapse is a part of the circuitry that makes sense of that data and interprets it for the rest of the body, and in the museum environment for the visitor. And so that idea of a synapse as a kind of a junction of for flows of data, and the museum's role of making sense of that and in unexpected and perhaps countercultural ways is, at least with my current thinking, a suggestion of in terms of the role of the museum going forward. We are certainly entering a world organizationally where, of course, museums are becoming more networked and more flexible and adaptive, and hopefully evolving more easily, although I know there's practical issues, of course, to discuss there, and working at this global and local level, as has been, I think, explored with many of the example projects over the last couple of days. As a final analogy, I show here the I Ching, which is an ancient Chinese divination tool. I'm sure you know it. It's a way of reading patterns in the throw of the coins, and patterns in the hexagrams, which are used to interpret the throw of the coins. And I refer to it partly because it is using pattern to distill great insight for people's individual lives, but it also has a very interesting role in the history of computation, because Leibniz, the philosopher in the 17th century, who created the binary system of zeros and ones, which drives computation today, he looked to the I Ching to build faith and credence in his own thinking. And it's an example of that East-West exchange of ideas that I hope we can, access more and more, that cross-cultural way of surfacing knowledge. So finding patterns across dimensions, a form of kind of digital geomancy, as I've referred to it, for the 21st century. But looking forward, just my hope, as I'm sure it is our collective hope, I hope we can get to a point where we have a vast diversity of histories emerging, unlocking the possibility of a much greater diversity of futures, made meaningful to a great, rich diversity of audiences in ways we've not been able to achieve before. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.